The pain seared through Alina Adams' arm like wildfire as her wagon hit yet another rut on the dusty trail toward Wickenburg, Arizona. A week's journey through the Arizona Territory in 1881 was challenging enough for a woman alone, but with a fractured limb dangling uselessly at her side, the prospect of reaching her destination seemed more impossible with each passing mile. Alina gritted her teeth as sweat beaded on her forehead, not just from the relentless August heat, but from the effort of controlling the team of horses with only one good arm. The broken limb had been crudely bound with strips torn from her petticoat, but the makeshift bandage did little to stabilize the injury she'd sustained 3 days ago when her wagon had overturned at a creek crossing. She'd managed to right the vehicle and continue her journey, but each jolt sent fresh waves of agony radiating from her fingertips to her shoulder. "Come on, girls," she urged the team of dappled grays pulling her wagon. "Just a few more miles until we stop for the night." The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the desert landscape in hues of amber and gold. Alina squinted against the light, scanning the terrain ahead for a suitable place to make camp. The vast emptiness of the Arizona Territory stretched before her, beautiful yet unforgiving to those who traveled unprepared. At 26, Alina was no stranger to hardship. Widowed 2 years prior when influenza claimed her husband and infant daughter back in Boston, she'd made the decision to start anew in the West, where her late uncle had left her a small parcel of land outside Wickenburg. The promise of a fresh beginning had sustained her through the grueling journey by train and then wagon. But now, with her arm throbbing mercilessly, doubt crept in like the evening shadows lengthening across the desert floor. A movement in the distance caught her eye, a rider approaching from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. Alina tensed, her good hand instinctively reaching for the small revolver tucked beneath the wagon seat. Lone travelers, especially women, were vulnerable in these parts. As the rider drew closer, Alina could make out the broad shoulders and easy posture of a man comfortable in the saddle. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, kicked up dust as they approached her wagon at a steady trot. "Evening, madam," the stranger called, tipping his hat as he pulled alongside her wagon. His voice was deep with a slight southern drawl, his face partially obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. "Good evening," Alina replied cautiously, her fingers still resting on the hidden revolver. The man seemed to notice her guarded demeanor and kept a respectful distance. "Name's Kieran Quad. Couldn't help but notice you're traveling alone." His eyes dropped to her injured arm, and his expression shifted to one of concern. "And you're hurt?" Alina straightened her spine, unwilling to appear as vulnerable as she felt. "I'm managing just fine, Mr. Quad." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he shook his head. "Begging your pardon, madam, but that arm needs proper attention. I've got some experience with such injuries. Would you permit me to take a look?" Alina hesitated. She'd encountered her fair share of unsavory characters during her journey west, but there was something in Kieran Quad's direct gaze that inspired trust rather than fear. His eyes, a striking shade of blue against his sun-bronzed skin, held no malice, only genuine concern. "I'm Alina Adams," she finally said, relenting slightly. "I'm headed to Wickenburg." Kieran nodded, guiding his horse closer to her wagon. "That's a good 4 days' ride from here, Mrs. Adams, and that's with 2 good arms handling the reins." Alina winced as another jolt sent pain shooting through her injured limb. "It's Miss Adams," she corrected, "and I don't have much choice in the matter." Kieran dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His clothing was typical of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and a leather vest worn from years of use. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her injured arm. After a moment's consideration, Alina nodded, watching warily as he approached. With surprising gentleness for such large hands, Kieran carefully examined her makeshift bandage. "How long ago did this happen?" "3 days back. My wagon overturned at a creek crossing east of here." Kieran frowned, his fingers lightly probing the area around the break. Alina couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. "My apologies, Miss Adams," he said, immediately withdrawing his touch. "But this needs proper splinting, and soon." "The bone's not set right." Alina swallowed hard, trying to ignore the throbbing that had intensified with his examination. "I figured as much, but there wasn't much I could do about it alone." Kieran glanced at the setting sun, then back at Alina. "Night's coming on fast. There's a decent spot to make camp about half a mile ahead. Small spring, some shelter from the wind. I suggest we stop there, and I'll see to that arm properly." Alina hesitated. The prospect of spending the night in the company of a stranger, a man she'd just met, went against every convention she'd been raised with. Yet the searing pain in her arm and the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders made the decision for her. "I would appreciate the assistance, Mr. Quad," she said finally. Kieran nodded, his expression revealing nothing of what he might think of a proper Eastern lady traveling alone in such circumstances. "I'll ride ahead and make sure the site is secure. You follow along, and I'll have a fire going by the time you arrive." True to his word, by the time Alina guided her wagon to the spot Kieran had indicated, he had a small fire crackling and had cleared a level area for her wagon. The site was indeed well chosen. A small spring bubbled from between rocks, providing fresh water, and a cluster of mesquite trees offered some protection from the elements. Alina set the brake on her wagon with her good hand, but when she attempted to climb down from the seat, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Before she could fall, Kieran was at her side, his strong hand steadying her. "Easy now," he murmured, helping her to a flat rock near the fire. "When did you last eat?" Alina tried to remember. "I had some hardtack at sunrise," she admitted. Kieran's expression turned stern. "No wonder you're light-headed. Pain and hunger are a poor combination." He moved to his saddlebags and withdrew a small package wrapped in cloth. "It's not much jerky and some biscuits, but it'll tide you over until I can fix something more substantial." As Alina gratefully accepted the offered food, Kieran busied himself unhitching her horses and seeing to their care. She watched him work, noting the easy confidence with which he moved around the animals. They responded to him readily, another point in his favor. Alina had always believed that horses were excellent judges of character. When the team was settled, Kieran returned to the fire, carrying a small leather case and several straight branches he'd cut from a nearby tree. "Now, about that arm," he said, settling beside her. "I need to set it properly before splinting it. I won't lie to you, it's going to hurt something fierce." Alina nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I understand." Kieran opened the leather case, revealing a small assortment of medical supplies. "I worked as an army scout for a few years," he explained, noting her surprise. "Picked up some doctoring skills out of necessity. There isn't always a surgeon around when you need one." He prepared a small dose from a bottle of amber liquid. "Laudanum," he explained. "Not enough to knock you out completely, but it'll take the edge off." Alina accepted the medicine without protest, swallowing it despite its bitter taste. As they waited for it to take effect, Kieran told her about the surrounding territory, pointing out landmarks visible in the fading light and naming the distant mountain ranges. His voice was steady and calming, a deliberate distraction that Alina appreciated. When her eyes began to grow heavy and the pain in her arm receded to a dull throb, Kieran moved closer. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Alina nodded, bracing herself. With swift, practiced movements, Kieran unwrapped her crude bandage and assessed the break. "Clean fracture," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "That's good. On the count of 3, 1. Without finishing the count, he suddenly pulled and twisted her arm in one fluid motion. Alina's scream pierced the desert twilight, startling a nearby jackrabbit into flight. Spots danced before her eyes as nausea threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm sorry," Kieran said, his voice genuinely regretful as he quickly began splinting her arm with the branches and strips of cloth. "Counting just makes people tense up. Better to get it done when they're not expecting it." Alina drew in ragged breaths, tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "A warning would have been appreciated," she managed between gasps. A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips. "I'll remember that for next time." "There won't be a next time," Alina retorted, finding her voice as the initial shock of pain began to subside. Kieran finished securing the splint, his touch gentle despite the firmness needed to properly immobilize her arm. "There. That should hold it while it heals, provided you don't try to drive a wagon one-handed for the next 6 weeks." Alina looked down at his handiwork, impressed despite her lingering irritation. The splint was professionally done, her arm now held securely between smooth wooden branches, bound with clean strips of fabric. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. Kieran nodded, packing away his supplies. "You should rest. I'll see to supper." As the laudanum took greater hold, Alina found herself observing Kieran with increasing interest as he moved efficiently around their small camp. He added wood to the fire, set a small pot of beans to heat, and prepared coffee in a battered tin pot. His movements were economical, those of a man accustomed to taking care of himself in the wilderness. "May I ask what brings you to this part of the territory, Mr. Quad?" Alina ventured as he handed her a tin cup of strong, black coffee. Kieran settled on his haunches across the fire from her. "Just passing through. Finished up a cattle drive to the railhead at Maricopa, and now I'm headed back to the ranch where I work. It's about 2 days' ride southwest of Wickenburg." He paused, studying her with open curiosity. "And what brings a lady like yourself out here alone?" Alina sipped her coffee before answering. "My uncle left me a parcel of land near Wickenburg. He moved west 30 years ago and built a small ranch. When he died last winter, I inherited it." "You planning to work it yourself?" There was no judgment in his tone, only genuine interest, but Alina still felt defensive. "I intend to try. My alternatives in Boston were limited, to say the least." Kieran nodded, stirring the pot of beans. "The West can be a fresh start for those willing to work hard, but ranching's no easy life, especially for someone on their own." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Quad." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I don't doubt that for a moment, Miss Adams. Anyone who can drive a wagon for 3 days with a broken arm has grit to spare." His compliment warmed her more than it should have. Alina blamed the laudanum for the pleasant haziness settling over her thoughts, making her more talkative than usual with a stranger. "My husband and daughter died 2 years ago," she found herself saying. "Influenza, within a week of each other." Kieran's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." Alina nodded, accepting his words without the usual platitudes that typically followed such revelations. "When my uncle's solicitor contacted me about the inheritance, it seemed like providence. A chance to build something new, away from the memories. Kieran served her a plate of beans and salt pork, along with a thick slice of cornbread from his provisions. "The territory has a way of either breaking people or remaking them," he said thoughtfully. "Sounds like you're determined it won't break you." As they ate in companionable silence, Alina found herself studying Kieran when he wasn't looking. He was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often, though his demeanor now was serious. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, while clean, bore the calluses of hard work. "How long have you been in Arizona territory?" she asked eventually. "Going on 8 years now," Kieran replied. "Came west after the war. Tried my hand at prospecting for a while, then drifted into ranch work. Found I had a knack for horses." "You were in the war?" Alina asked, noting that he would have been quite young during the conflict. A shadow passed over his face. "Joined up in '64. Was barely 17, but they weren't being particular about age by then. Saw action at Nashville and in the Carolinas campaign." His tone made it clear he didn't care to elaborate further. Alina respected his reticence. The war had left scars on everyone, some more visible than others. "You should rest," Kieran said, changing the subject as he took her empty plate. "It's been a long day and that arm needs time to heal. I'll keep watch." Alina wanted to protest that she wasn't tired, but the combination of pain, laudanum, and the first proper meal she'd had in days was taking its toll. Her eyelids grew heavy as she watched Kieran clean their dishes using sand and a small amount of precious water. "You can sleep in your wagon," he said, returning to the fire. "I'll bed down out here." "Thank you, Mr. Quad," Alina said, struggling to her feet. The world tilted alarmingly, and once again Kieran was at her side, steadying her. "Easy," he murmured, his arm strong around her waist. "Let me help you." With his support, Alina made it to her wagon. He helped her climb inside, where her bedroll was already laid out on top of her carefully packed belongings. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he said, preparing to withdraw. Alina caught his wrist with her good hand. "Mr. Quad, why are you helping me? Most men would have tipped their hat and ridden on." In the dim light, Kieran's expression was difficult to read. "My mother raised me to believe a man doesn't leave someone in trouble when he has the means to help," he said simply. "Get some rest, Miss Adams. We've got a long road ahead tomorrow." As he stepped away from the wagon, Alina was struck by the implication in his words. "We." Kieran paused, looking back at her. "You can't drive that wagon with one arm, and I can't in good conscience leave you out here alone. If you'll permit it, I'll drive you to Wickenburg." Relief and gratitude washed over Alina in equal measure. "I couldn't ask you to go so far out of your way." "You didn't ask, I offered." His tone brooked no argument. "Now get some sleep." As Kieran moved away from the wagon, Alina settled back onto her bedroll, the pain in her arm dulled by the laudanum but not entirely gone. Despite the discomfort, she felt safer than she had in days. There was something reassuring about Kieran Quad's quiet competence and straightforward manner. Outside, she could hear him moving around the camp, checking on the horses one last time before settling by the fire. Alina closed her eyes, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft hooting of an owl, the gentle rustling of the breeze through the mesquite trees. For the first time since leaving Boston, Alina felt that perhaps she hadn't made a terrible mistake in coming west. With that comforting thought, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The sun had barely crested the eastern horizon when Alina awoke to the aroma of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and the lingering effects of the laudanum, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the throbbing in her splinted arm brought the previous day's events rushing back, Kieran Quad, her broken arm, his offer to drive her to Wickenburg. Gingerly, Alina sat up, testing her arm. The pain was still present but had subsided to a dull ache when she kept it immobile. Using her good arm, she straightened her rumpled clothing as best she could and attempted to smooth her honey-brown hair, which had mostly escaped its pins during the night. "Good morning," Kieran called from outside. "Coffee's ready when you are." Alina made her way carefully out of the wagon, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. In Boston, she would never have let a gentleman see her in such a state, but the rules of propriety seemed distant and impractical in the vast Arizona wilderness. Kieran was crouched by the fire, turning strips of bacon in a small skillet. He'd already packed most of their camp. The horses were saddled and hitched, ready for departure. He looked up as she approached, a smile warming his features. "You're looking better this morning," he observed, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. Alina accepted the coffee gratefully. "I feel better, thanks to your ministrations. How's the arm? Painful, but not unbearably so." Kieran nodded, serving up bacon alongside johnnycakes he'd prepared on a flat stone by the fire. "Good. We should change the bandages before we head out, make sure everything's still aligned properly." They ate breakfast companionably, watching the desert landscape transform in the morning light. The previous night's chill dissipated rapidly as the sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day ahead. After the meal, Kieran checked her arm, his touch clinical yet gentle as he ensured the splint was still secure. Satisfied with his work, he helped Alina into the wagon before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "It's about 3 days to Wickenburg from here," he said, clicking to the team. "Longer if we take it easy, which I think we should with that arm of yours." Alina nodded, grateful for the competent way he handled the team, far more smoothly than she'd been able to manage one-handed. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Quad." Kieran glanced at her, the morning sun highlighting the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "No debt necessary, Miss Adams. Just doing what anyone would do." "We both know that's not true," Alina replied softly. "Most would have wished me well and continued on their way." Kieran fell silent, his gaze returning to the trail ahead. His horse, a handsome chestnut stallion named Rusty, followed obediently behind the wagon, secured by a lead rope. As they traveled, Kieran proved to be knowledgeable about the territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the region's history. He spoke of the indigenous peoples who had inhabited the land for generations, the Spanish explorers who had come searching for mythical cities of gold, and the more recent influx of miners, ranchers, and settlers seeking their fortunes. That ridge to the north was the site of a skirmish between Apache warriors and cavalry troops back in '68, he explained, gesturing with his chin toward a distant formation. The Apache held the high ground for 3 days before slipping away in the night. Army never caught them. Alina studied the terrain with newfound interest. "You seem to know a great deal about the conflicts here." Kieran's expression turned contemplative. "Like I said, I worked as an army scout for a while after the war, saw things from both sides, I suppose. The situation with the native tribes isn't as simple as the newspapers back east would have people believe." Alina appreciated his balanced perspective. Her own knowledge of Western affairs had been limited to what she'd read in Boston papers and dime novels, which she was rapidly discovering bore little resemblance to reality. "And what of Wickenburg?" she asked. "What can I expect there?" "It's grown considerably since it was founded," Kieran replied. "Started as a mining camp after gold was discovered at the Vulture mine, but it's becoming more established now. Has a hotel, general store, couple of saloons." still rough around the edges compared to eastern cities but civilized enough. And the surrounding countryside, where my uncle's ranch is located, depends on which direction. What was your uncle's name? Samuel Bennett. Recognition flickered in Kieran's eyes. Old Sam Bennett. You're his niece, Alina nodded, surprised. You knew him. Everyone knew Sam, Kieran said, a note of respect in his voice. Had a small spread about 15 miles southwest of town. Good water rights, decent grazing land, kept mostly to himself but was always fair in his dealings. Sorry to hear he passed. The personal connection to her uncle, however tenuous, made Alina feel less adrift. What can you tell me about his ranch? Kieran considered before answering. It's not large, maybe 800 acres, enough to run a small herd if managed properly. Last I heard, he had about 60 head of cattle and some decent quarter horses. Simple cabin, barn, corral, nothing fancy but solid. Do you know if anyone's been looking after it since he died? Juan Vasquez, probably. He worked for your uncle for years, lived in a small adobe house on the property with his wife, Maria. Good people. Alina felt a rush of relief. She'd worried that the property might have been abandoned or, worse, claimed by squatters in the months since her uncle's death. That's reassuring to hear. As the day progressed, the heat intensified. Kieran kept a steady pace, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and offer them water from canteens he'd filled at the spring that morning. During one such stop, in the sparse shade of a mesquite tree, Alina found herself studying Kieran's profile as he surveyed the horizon, ever vigilant. "May I ask a personal question, Mr. Quad?" she ventured. He turned to her, one eyebrow raised in curiosity. "You may ask." "Can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough," Alina conceded. "I was wondering why a man with your skills isn't running his own ranch rather than working for someone else." Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, a mixture of resignation and old pain. "Had my own place once, up near Prescott. Lost it." "I'm sorry," Alina said, sensing she'd touched on a sensitive subject. "I didn't mean to pry." Kieran shrugged, his expression closing off. "It was a long time ago." They continued their journey in silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of hooves the only sounds breaking the desert stillness. Eventually, Kieran spoke again, his voice softer than before. "It was 1877. Drought year. Wells dried up, cattle died, bank foreclosed, tale as old as the territory itself." His words were matter-of-fact, but Alina could hear the undercurrent of loss beneath them. "That must have been devastating," she said quietly. Kieran's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. "It was. But a man picks himself up and carries on. That's all any of us can do." The simple dignity in his response touched Alina deeply. Here was someone who understood loss intimately, yet had found the strength to continue. Perhaps that was why he'd stopped to help her. He recognized a kindred spirit, trying to rebuild from the ashes of a previous life. As the day wore on, Alina found herself sharing more of her own story, her childhood in Boston as the daughter of a professor, her marriage at 20 to a promising young lawyer, the devastating loss of her husband and infant daughter to influenza that had swept through their neighborhood. "After they died, I stayed with my parents for a while," she explained, "but their house felt suffocating with its memories and expectations. They wanted me to remarry, preferably to one of my late husband's colleagues. I couldn't bear the thought. So when the letter came about your uncle's ranch, it seemed like providence," Alina confirmed. "A chance to be something other than a grieving widow destined for another suitable marriage." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West has a way of offering new beginnings." "Is that what you found?" she asked. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I'm still looking, I suppose, but there's freedom in the open country that can't be found elsewhere." By late afternoon, they reached a small creek where Kieran suggested they make camp for the night. The spot was well-chosen, sheltered by cottonwood trees, with fresh water and enough grass for the horses to graze, with practiced efficiency. Kieran unhitched the team and saw to the animals' needs before setting up camp. Alina tried to help, but with one arm in a splint, she found herself more hindrance than help. "Please sit," Kieran finally said, guiding her to a fallen log. "You'll have plenty of opportunity to work once that arm heals. For now, just rest." Alina reluctantly complied, watching as Kieran prepared their evening meal. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident, economical, with no wasted motion. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked as he expertly prepared a rabbit he'd shot earlier in the day. "Necessity," he replied with a wry smile. "A man either learns to feed himself out here or goes hungry, though I can't claim this is anything fancy." "It smells wonderful," Alina assured him. After days of hardtack and jerky during her solo journey, even simple trail cooking seemed luxurious. As dusk fell, they ate by firelight, the desert coming alive with nocturnal sounds around them. Alina found herself more relaxed in Kieran's company than she would have thought possible with a man she'd known for barely a day. "Tell me about the ranch where you work," she prompted, genuinely curious about his life. Kieran settled back, cradling his coffee cup. "The Circle D belongs to James Donovan. Good man, fair employer. Has about 3,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. I'm his foreman, oversee the other hands, manage the breeding program for his horses, handle the cattle drives to the railhead." "It sounds like an important position." "Has its challenges," Kieran acknowledged, "but I enjoy the work. Donovan gives me a free hand to run things as I see fit, and the other men respect me enough to follow my lead without too much grumbling." "And is there family?" Alina asked hesitantly, immediately regretting the question when she saw Kieran's expression shift. "No," he said simply. "No family." Before Alina could apologize for overstepping, Kieran stood and gathered their plates. "We should turn in early, long day ahead tomorrow." That night, as Alina lay in her wagon listening to the desert wind whispering through the cottonwood leaves, she found herself wondering about the man sleeping by the fire outside. Kieran Quad was an enigma, capable, educated, clearly intelligent, yet choosing a solitary existence as a ranch foreman rather than pursuing opportunities that his abilities might have afforded him in more settled areas. There was a story there, she was certain, beyond the loss of his ranch years ago. But Alina respected his privacy too much to pry further. Even as her curiosity about him grew, morning came with the chorus of desert birds and the aroma of coffee brewing over a freshly stoked fire. Alina awoke feeling more rested than she had in days, the pain in her arm reduced to a dull throb rather than the sharp agony of previous mornings. Kieran was already up, as she'd expected, tending to the horses and preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. "Sleep well?" he asked as she approached the fire. Alina nodded, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Better than I have since leaving Boston, actually." "Good. We've got a full day ahead. Should reach the Thompson Creek crossing by nightfall if we make good time." As they ate breakfast, Kieran outlined the day's journey, describing landmarks they would pass and potential challenges along the trail. His knowledge of the territory was impressive, and Alina found herself increasingly grateful for his guidance. She'd have been hard-pressed to navigate alone, especially with her injury. They set out as the sun crested the eastern horizon, the day already promising to be hot. Alina had adapted her clothing as best she could for desert travel, wearing the lightest of her dresses and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the relentless sun. But by mid-morning, she was still uncomfortably warm. Kieran noticed her discomfort and suggested they stop in the shade of a rocky outcropping to rest. As they drank sparingly from their canteens, he offered her a bandana soaked in cool water. "For your neck and wrists," he explained. "Helps cool the blood." Alina gratefully applied the damp cloth, sighing with relief at the simple comfort it provided. "You seem remarkably well adapted to this climate." "Wasn't always," Kieran admitted with a wry smile. "My first summer in the territory nearly did me in. Came from Virginia, originally plenty hot and humid there, but nothing like this dry heat. Takes time to acclimate." "Virginia?" Alina asked, surprised. "Your accent doesn't sound southern," Kieran shrugged. "Left when I was young, moved around a lot after the war. Accents fade." There it was again, that careful deflection, whenever conversation turned too personal. Alina respected his boundaries, but found herself increasingly curious about the history that had shaped this complex man. As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changed, transitioning from open desert to more varied terrain with scattered juniper and piñon pine. The trail wound through rocky arroyos and across stretches of grassland, dotted with kala and prickly pear cactus. Around midday, Kieran suddenly tensed, his gaze fixed on a distant dust cloud moving parallel to their route. "Riders," he said quietly, reaching for the rifle secured beneath the wagon seat. Alina felt her heart rate quicken. "Trouble, maybe." Kieran's expression was grave. "Could be nothing, ranchers moving cattle, travelers like us. Could be something else." "Indians?" Alina asked, thinking of the newspaper stories she'd read about Apache raids. Kieran shook his head. "Most of the Apache are on reservations now, though there are still small bands holding out. More likely to be bandits if it's trouble. This route is known for ambushes, especially of lone travelers." He handed her the reins and stood carefully in the moving wagon, balancing with the ease of long practice as he surveyed the approaching riders through a small spyglass pulled from his pocket. After a tense moment, he relaxed slightly. "Cavalry patrol," he reported, settling back onto the seat. "4 troopers and a sergeant by the looks of it." Alina released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That's a relief." "Generally, yes," Kieran agreed, though his tone remained cautious. "Though some troopers can be almost as troublesome as bandits, depending on the unit and who's in charge." The patrol altered course to intercept them, and Kieran slowed the wagon, keeping his hands visible and his expression neutral as the soldiers approached. The sergeant, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache, raised his hand in greeting. "Morning, folks." "Sergeant Miller, 5th Cavalry out of Fort McDowell." "Morning, Sergeant," Kieran replied respectfully. "Kieran Quad, foreman at the Circle D Ranch. This is Miss Alina Adams, headed to claim her late uncle's property near Wickenburg." The sergeant's eyes flicked to Alina's splinted arm, then back to Kieran. "Any trouble on the trail?" "None so far," Kieran answered. "Miss Adams had an accident a few days back, overturned her wagon at a creek crossing. I'm helping her reach her destination." Sergeant Miller nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. "Trail's been quiet lately, but we had reports of a gang operating south of here, 3 men hitting isolated homesteads and travelers. Keep your eyes open." "Appreciate the warning," Kieran said. "You boys been out long?" 4 days. "Heading back to the fort now." The sergeant's gaze lingered on Alina. "Madam, if you'd prefer military escort, we could arrange." "Thank you, Sergeant," Alina interjected politely, "but Mr. Quad has been most helpful. I'm quite comfortable continuing our journey as planned." If the sergeant was surprised by her refusal, he didn't show it. With a tip of his hat, he signaled to his men, and the patrol continued on their way, dust rising in their wake, Once they were out of earshot, Kieran glanced at Alina with a hint of amusement. Most ladies would jump at the chance for military escort. Alina smoothed her skirts with her good hand. I prefer to honor commitments. You've gone out of your way to help me. It would be poor repayment to abandon you at the first alternative. Something shifted in Kieran's expression, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. Well then, he said, clicking to the team, we'd best keep moving if we want to reach Thompson Creek by nightfall. As the day progressed, Alina found herself increasingly aware of Kieran's presence beside her, the solid breadth of his shoulders, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the quiet confidence with which he handled every challenge the trail presented. She'd known him barely 36 hours, yet already she felt a connection that defied easy explanation. Perhaps it was the intensity of their circumstances, or perhaps there was something about Kieran Quad himself that resonated with her in ways she hadn't experienced before. By late afternoon, they reached Thompson Creek, a modest waterway cutting through a small valley lush with vegetation compared to the arid landscape they'd traversed. Kieran guided the wagon to a sheltered spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods, where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Good place to camp, he explained, setting the brake. Water for the horses, fish in the creek if we've a mind to catch supper, and these trees will give shelter from the night wind. As Kieran unhitched the team, Alina attempted to gather wood for the fire one-handed, determined not to be entirely helpless. She managed to collect a small armful before Kieran returned from seeing to the horses. You don't need to do that, he said, moving to take the wood from her. Alina held her ground. I'm perfectly capable of contributing, Mr. Quad. The broken arm hasn't rendered me completely useless. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Stubborn, aren't you? Determined, Alina corrected, allowing him to take the wood but immediately turning to collect more. Kieran watched her for a moment, then shook his head with what might have been admiration. Fair enough. I'll see about those fish while you finish with the wood. Just don't overdo it with that arm. While Alina arranged their camp as best she could one-handed, Kieran disappeared downstream with a hand line and hooks from his saddlebags. He returned less than an hour later with 4 decent-sized trout, which he cleaned with practiced efficiency at the creek's edge. Been a while since I've had fresh fish, Alina commented as he prepared them for cooking, seasoning the fillets with salt and dried herbs from a small pouch in his provisions. One of the advantages of traveling this route, Kieran replied. The creek's reliable even in dry years. Used to camp here regular when I was scouting for the army. As the fish cooked on hot stones arranged around the fire, Kieran checked Alina's splint, making sure the bone was still properly aligned and that no infection had set in. His touch was gentle but firm, professional, yet somehow intimate in the quiet of the gathering dusk. Healing well, he pronounced, rewrapping the splint. You've been lucky clean break, no fever. Keep it immobilized and you should regain full use in time. Thanks to your care, Alina acknowledged softly. Their eyes met over her bandaged arm, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. For a moment, Alina thought Kieran might say something, but instead he turned his attention back to their supper, breaking the momentary connection. They ate by firelight, the fish succulent and flavorful after days of trail rations. As night descended fully, the temperature dropped, and Alina found herself shivering slightly despite the fire's warmth. Without comment, Kieran retrieved a woolen blanket from his bedroll and draped it around her shoulders. Desert nights get cold, he said simply, returning to his place across the fire. The blanket carried his scent leather, wood smoke, and something uniquely him. Alina drew it closer, grateful for both the warmth and the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "Tell me about the ranch," she said after a comfortable silence. "My uncle's place. You mentioned it's small but has good water rights." Kieran nodded, settling back with his coffee. Sam had a good eye for land. His property includes part of Hassayampa Creek, which runs year-round in that section. Soil's decent for growing alfalfa to supplement grazing during dry spells. The cabin's simple but solid 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, if I remember right. And the livestock. You mentioned cattle and horses, mostly Herefords, I believe. Good, hardy stock that does well in this climate. The horses are quarter horses, not fancy, but sturdy and sensible for ranch work. Alina tried to envision the property that would soon be her home, piecing together an image from Kieran's descriptions. "Do you think I can make a go of it? Honestly?" Kieran considered her question seriously, his blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "It won't be easy," he said finally. "Ranching's hard work even for those raised to it, but with Juan and Maria still there and if you're willing to learn." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I think you can make a go of it. You've already shown more grit than most." His assessment, delivered without flattery or condescension, meant more to Alina than any empty reassurances might have. She found herself wanting to prove him right, to demonstrate that his faith in her abilities wasn't misplaced. "I'll need to learn a great deal," she acknowledged. "Learning comes with doing," Kieran said simply. "And neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we all survive." "Are you a neighbor, then?" Alina asked, suddenly realizing she didn't know exactly how far the Circle D ranch was from her uncle's property. "Near enough," Kieran replied. "Circle D borders your uncle's land on the western boundary. We share water rights to part of the creek." The knowledge that Kieran would be nearby after they reached Wickenburg brought an unexpected surge of relief. Alina had been preparing herself for the probability that once he delivered her safely to her destination, she might never see him again. "Then perhaps I might call upon your expertise from time to time," she ventured. Kieran's expression softened in the firelight. "I'd be happy to help however I can, Miss Adams." As the fire burned low and the night sounds of the desert enveloped their small camp, Alina found herself reluctant to retire to her wagon. There was something companionable about sitting with Kieran in the quiet darkness, watching the embers glow and listening to the gentle burble of the creek nearby. "You should get some rest," Kieran said eventually, his voice low. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Alina nodded, though she made no immediate move to leave. "Mr. Quad." "Kieran," she said, using his given name for the first time, "I want you to know how grateful I am for your help. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along when you did." In the dying firelight, she saw something flicker across his features, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "No," Alina contradicted gently. "Not anyone. You're a good man, Kieran Quad." Before she could reconsider, Alina leaned across the small space between them and pressed a soft kiss to his weathered cheek. It was a brief contact, but she felt him tense slightly in surprise. "Good night," she murmured, rising quickly and making her way to the wagon before he could respond. Inside her mobile sanctuary, Alina's heart pounded as she settled onto her bedroll, wondering if she'd overstepped. The gesture had been impulsive, driven by genuine gratitude, and something else she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. Outside, she could hear Kieran moving around the camp, banking the fire for the night and making a final check on the horses. Eventually, the sound ceased, and Alina knew he had settled into his own bedroll near the fire. Sleep was slow in coming, as she replayed the moment of the kiss in her mind, recalling the rough texture of his cheek beneath her lips and the clean, masculine scent of him. It had been 2 years since she'd experienced even such innocent physical contact with a man, and the simple kiss had awakened feelings she'd thought long buried with her husband. Alina finally drifted off with the distant howl of coyotes echoing across the desert, and the strange certainty that her life had somehow shifted irreversibly in the space of 2 days. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of another scorching day. Alina awoke to find Kieran already up and about, coffee brewing over a small fire. If her impulsive gesture the night before had discomfited him, he showed no sign of it as he greeted her with the same quiet courtesy he'd displayed since their first meeting. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a cup of strong black coffee. "Well enough," Alina replied, grateful for his tact in not mentioning her momentary lapse in propriety. "And you?" "Fine," Kieran said, though the shadows beneath his eyes suggested otherwise. "I've fixed a quick breakfast. We should reach Wickenburg by late tomorrow if the weather holds, and we make good time today." The reminder that their journey together was drawing to a close created an unexpected pang in Alina's chest. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the practical matters at hand. After a breakfast of jonna cakes and the last of the previous night's fish, they broke camp efficiently and continued on their way. The terrain became increasingly varied as they traveled, transitioning from desert scrub to areas of chaparral and occasional stretches of grassland suitable for cattle grazing. "We're entering ranching country now," Kieran explained as they passed a distant herd of cattle. "Most of these spreads have been established within the last 15 years or so, since the Apache were forced onto reservations and the territory became safer for settlement." Alina noted the conflicted tone in his voice. "You don't approve?" Kieran considered her question carefully before answering. "It's complicated. I understand why people come the promise of land, opportunity, a fresh start. I came for the same reasons, but there's no denying that this land belonged to others first and the way it was taken." He shook his head. "Let's just say history rarely remembers the losers kindly, and the real story of the West isn't as heroic as the dime novels make it out to be." His nuanced perspective surprised and impressed Alina. Most white settlers she'd encountered viewed Western expansion as manifest destiny, with little consideration for those displaced in the process. "Were you ever in conflict with the native peoples during your time as a scout?" she asked. "Some," Kieran admitted, his expression growing distant. "Never took pride in it. Mostly I guided troops through difficult terrain, tracked hunting parties that had left the reservations, that sort of thing." The Apache were formidable opponents, knew the land better than any white man could hope to, survived in conditions that would kill most soldiers within days. Yet they lost in the end. Numbers and technology eventually prevail, even against superior skill and knowledge, Kieran said grimly. But it wasn't a clean victory, despite what the newspapers claim. There are still bands out there, holding to the old ways, refusing to surrender. Can't say I blame them. They traveled in thoughtful silence for a time, the wagon creaking rhythmically as they followed the well-worn trail. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Kieran guided the wagon to a small stand of mesquite trees offering minimal shade. "We'll rest here through the worst of the heat," he decided, setting the brake and helping Alina down from the wagon seat. The brief contact of his hands at her waist as he lifted her to the ground sent an unexpected thrill through Alina, reminding her of her impulsive kiss the night before. She quickly stepped away, busying herself with retrieving canteens from the wagon while Kieran saw to the horses. They shared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and dried apples in the sparse shade, both aware of the dwindling supplies. Kieran assured her they'd reach a small settlement by evening where they could replenish their provisions. "How's the arm today?" he asked, noticing her occasional winces when she moved too quickly. "Better," Alina replied honestly. "Still painful, but more of an ache than the sharp pain of before." Kieran nodded, satisfied. "Good. Bones knitting properly then. You'll need to keep it splinted for at least another month, but it should heal clean if you're careful." "I'll be in your debt for more than just the transportation to Wickenburg," Alina said quietly. A slight smile touched Kieran's lips. "No debt between neighbors, remember. Besides, I've enjoyed the company. Trail gets lonely riding solo." Their eyes met briefly before Kieran looked away, focusing on adjusting the bandana at his neck. Alina wondered if he was thinking about her impulsive kiss, and if so, what he made of it. As they prepared to continue their journey, Alina noticed Kieran scanning the horizon with unusual intensity, his expression troubled. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Not sure," he replied, his gaze fixed on a distant smudge to the southwest. "Could be dust from a herd, could be riders." He squinted against the sun's glare. "Best be prepared, just in case." Kieran checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded before returning it to his holster. He then placed his rifle within easy reach beneath the wagon seat before helping Alina back up. "Are you expecting trouble?" Alina asked, concern edging her voice. "Not expecting it, but it pays to be cautious," Kieran replied, taking up the reins. "This stretch of trail has seen its share of banditry over the years." They continued their journey, Kieran now more vigilant than before, his gaze constantly sweeping the surrounding terrain. Alina found his tension contagious, her own senses heightening as she scanned the landscape for any sign of danger. For 2 hours, they traveled without incident, the suspected dust cloud either dissipating or moving away from their route. Alina had just begun to relax when Kieran suddenly tensed beside her, his hand moving to the rifle under the seat. "Riders," he said quietly, nodding toward a rocky ridge about half a mile ahead. "3 of them, coming fast." Alina's heart began to race as she made out the approaching horsemen, kicking up dust as they rode directly toward the wagon. "Friends of yours?" she asked, already knowing the answer from Kieran's expression. "Not likely," he replied grimly. "When they get closer, I want you to take the reins. I'll handle them." "Kieran, no arguments, Alina," he said, his tone brooking no debate. "If shooting starts, get down below the seat and stay there." The approaching riders slowed as they neared, spreading out in a manner that effectively blocked the trail ahead. All 3 were rough-looking men, unshaven and trail-worn, their clothes dusty and their expressions predatory. Kieran halted the wagon about 30 yards from the trio, his posture relaxed, but his hand resting casually near his revolver. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called, his voice neutral. "Something we can help you with." The man in the center, wearing a battered black hat and sporting a jagged scar across one cheek, grinned unpleasantly. "Just being neighborly, friend. Dangerous country for folks traveling alone, especially with a lady present." "We're managing just fine," Kieran replied coolly. "Appreciate your concern, but we'll be on our way now." The scarred man's grin widened. "Now that's not very sociable. We could use some supplies, and I'm sure you folks could spare some. Maybe a contribution to help us on our way." Alina felt a chill despite the heat. These men were clearly bandits, probably the same gang the cavalry sergeant had warned them about. "We're running low ourselves," Kieran said, his voice still even. "Barely enough to see us to Wickenburg." The man on the left, a wiry individual with a red bandana around his neck, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Ain't asking, mister. We're telling. And while you're at it, maybe the lady would like to step down and stretch her legs a bit," Keep us company." Alina felt her blood run cold at the implied threat, even as anger flared within her. Kieran's expression didn't change, but she felt him tense beside her, readying himself. "The lady stays where she is," Kieran said, his voice now hard as steel, "and we'll be passing through. Now." The scarred leader's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, friend. 3 against 1 ain't good odds." "Depends on the one," Kieran replied quietly. In a movement so swift Alina barely registered it, he had drawn his revolver and cocked it, the barrel aimed squarely at the scarred man's chest. "Now, I suggest you boys move aside and let us pass." The third bandit, who had remained silent until now, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Rance, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" the scarred man Rance snapped, his eyes never leaving Kieran. "You think you're fast enough to take all 3 of us before we put a bullet in you or the lady?" "I know I'm fast enough to put one through you before you clear leather," Kieran said calmly. "After that, it's anybody's guess. Care to try your luck?" Tense seconds stretched into what felt like minutes as Rance considered his options, his eyes cold and calculating. Finally, he offered a humorless laugh and raised his hands slightly. "No need for bloodshed today, I reckon. Maybe we just got off on the wrong foot." "Maybe," Kieran agreed, his revolver unwavering. "Now back your horses off the trail and let us pass." Reluctantly, Rance signaled to his companions, and the 3 bandits moved their mounts to the side of the trail, creating a narrow passage for the wagon. "Take the reins," Kieran murmured to Alina, passing them to her with his left hand while keeping his revolver trained on the bandits with his right. "Nice and steady." With her heart pounding, Alina guided the team forward, acutely aware of the hostile gazes of the 3 men as they passed. Kieran remained vigilant, his revolver ready, turning slightly on the seat to keep all 3 bandits in view. Once they were safely past, Kieran took the reins back, urging the team to a faster pace while continuing to watch their back trail. "Keep your head down," he instructed Alina, his expression grim. They might decide to try their luck anyway. For tense minutes, they traveled at a brisk trot, the wagon jolting over the uneven terrain. Alina expected at any moment to hear the crack of gunfire behind them, but the attack never came. Finally, after they'd put considerable distance between themselves and the bandits, Kieran allowed the team to slow to a more sustainable pace, though he continued to check their back trail regularly. "Will they follow us?" Alina asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Possibly," Kieran replied honestly. "Depends how desperate they are. We'll need to be extra vigilant tonight." The encounter had left Alina shaken but also filled with admiration for Kieran's calm handling of the situation. "You've dealt with their kind before," she observed. Kieran nodded grimly. "More times than I care to count. The West draws all sorts good men looking for honest work, families seeking a fresh start, but also those running from the law or looking to take advantage of others. Out here, where law enforcement is spread thin, a man needs to be capable of defending himself and those under his protection." "You were willing to die to protect me," Alina said quietly, the realization both humbling and frightening. Kieran's expression softened as he glanced at her. "Let's just say I'm glad it didn't come to that." They pushed on until dusk, making better time than expected despite the encounter with the bandits. As promised, they reached a small settlement just as the sun was setting, little more than a trading post, livery stable, and a handful of rough dwellings clustered around a dusty crossroads. "Cochrane Station," Kieran explained as they approached. "Not much to look at, but they'll have supplies and a safe place to spend the night." The trading post was a weathered wooden structure with a broad porch and a corral for livestock attached to one side. As Kieran halted the wagon, An elderly man with a shock of white hair emerged from the building, squinting at them in the fading light. "Well, if it ain't Kieran Quad," the man called, his weathered face breaking into a gap-toothed smile. "Been a spell since you passed this way." "Evening, Ezra," Kieran replied, jumping down from the wagon and moving to help Alina. "How's business?" "Same as always, just barely keeping the wolves from the door." Ezra's curious gaze shifted to Alina as Kieran gently lifted her down from the wagon seat. "Who's your companion?" "Miss Alina Adams," Kieran introduced her. "Heading to Wickenburg to claim her uncle's property. Miss Adams, this is Ezra Cochrane, proprietor of this fine establishment and purveyor of the worst coffee in the territory." Ezra cackled at the description. "And proud of it. Any coffee that don't put hair on your chest ain't worth drinking, I always say." He tipped his hat to Alina. "Pleasure, madam. Any relation to Sam Bennett, by chance?" Alina smiled, pleased at another connection to her uncle. "He was my mother's brother." "Fine man Sam was," Ezra said, nodding sagely. "Sorry to hear of his passing. Pneumonia, wasn't it?" "Yes," Alina confirmed. "Last winter. Shame. World could use more men cut from his cloth." Ezra gestured toward the trading post. "Come on in. Martha's got stew on the stove, and there's a room in back where you can freshen up, miss." The interior of the trading post was dim but tidy. Shelves stocked with an eclectic assortment of goods ranging from basic staples to tools, ammunition, and clothing. A pot-bellied stove in the corner provided warmth, and the aroma of something savory cooking filled the air. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Visitors, Ezra, Martha, you remember Kieran Quad, and this here's Miss Adams, Sam Bennett's niece." Martha's kind face lit up with a welcoming smile. "Of course, Mr. Quad, always good to see you, and Miss Adams, what a pleasure. Your uncle spoke of you often." Alina was touched to discover her uncle had mentioned her. In truth, they had corresponded infrequently over the years, separated by distance and different lives. "He did?" "Oh yes," Martha assured her. "Kept that daguerreotype of your family on his mantle. Said his little niece Alina had grown into a fine lady back east." Her gaze fell to Alina's splinted arm. "My goodness, what happened?" While Kieran explained about Alina's accident and their journey, Martha ushered her to a small back room where a basin of clean water and towels awaited. The simple opportunity to wash the dust from her face and hands felt like unimaginable luxury after days on the trail. When Alina emerged refreshed, she found Kieran, Ezra, and Martha seated at a rough-hewn table, bowls of steaming stew before them. Kieran rose as she approached, pulling out a chair for her with an instinctive courtesy that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. "Feels like civilization," Alina remarked as she sampled the hearty venison stew, rich with root vegetables and herbs. "Such as it is," Ezra chuckled. "We ain't exactly Boston society out here." "For which I am increasingly grateful," Alina replied with feeling, drawing surprised laughs from her companions. As they ate, Kieran discreetly informed Ezra about their encounter with the bandits. The old trader nodded grimly, not seeming particularly surprised. "Been hearing reports about that bunch for weeks now," he confirmed. "3 of them, led by a scarred fellow named of Rance Taggart. Used to ride with the younger gang until things got too hot for him in Missouri. Sheriff from Prescott came through 2 days ago, said they hit a homestead north of here, cleaned out the place, and left the family tied up in the summer heat. Lucky a neighbor found them before worse happened. They're getting bolder," Kieran observed. "Attacking in broad daylight now." "Territory's too big, lawmen too few," Ezra sighed. "Been that way since I settled here 30 years ago. Probably won't change in my lifetime." After the meal, While Martha showed Alina to a small room where she could spend the night, Kieran and Ezra stepped onto the porch to smoke and keep watch for any sign of the bandits. Alina could hear the low murmur of their voices through the thin walls as she prepared for bed, grateful for the simple comfort of a real mattress, however lumpy, after nights in the wagon. She was nearly asleep when a soft knock sounded at her door. Pulling a shawl around her shoulders over her nightgown, Alina opened it to find Kieran standing in the dim hallway, his expression serious. "Sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, "but I wanted to let you know I'll be keeping watch tonight, just as a precaution." Ezra's concerned those men might track us here. Alina felt a chill at the thought. Do you think they would be so bold? Hard to say. Ezra's place is more defensible than an open camp, but men like Taggart don't always think clearly when their pride's been wounded. Kieran's gaze softened as he noted her concern. "Don't worry. Between Ezra's shotgun and my revolver, they'd be fools to try anything." Alina nodded, trusting his assessment. "Thank you for letting me know." Kieran turned to go, then hesitated. "Alina," he said, using her given name with a familiarity that felt entirely natural now. "What you did today, keeping your composure when those men threatened us, that took real courage." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Kieran replied quietly. "It's facing what needs to be faced despite being afraid." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Kieran tipped his hat slightly. "Sleep well, Alina. We're safe here." As he walked away down the dark hallway, Alina closed her door, strangely comforted by his words and the knowledge that he was standing guard. Despite the potential danger, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, more relaxed than she'd felt in days. Morning brought no sign of the bandits, much to everyone's relief. After a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, bacon, and more of Ezra's notoriously strong coffee, Kieran settled their bill and replenished their supplies while Alina helped Martha clean up, insisting on contributing despite her injured arm. "That's a good man," Martha commented quietly as they worked side by side, nodding toward Kieran, who was loading supplies into the wagon outside. "Known him going on 6 years now. Never says much about himself, but his actions speak clear enough." Alina followed her gaze, watching as Kieran efficiently secured their provisions. "Yes, he is," she agreed softly. Martha gave her a knowing look. "And not hard on the eyes either, for those who notice such things." Alina felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't deny the older woman's implication. "He's been nothing but a gentleman," she said instead. "Of course he has," Martha chuckled. "That's the kind of man he is. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and it's not the way a man looks at just any traveling companion." Before Alina could respond to this surprising revelation, Ezra called from the front of the store that the wagon was ready. With a quick hug and promises to visit when she was settled at her uncle's ranch, Alina bid Martha farewell. Outside, Kieran helped her up to the wagon seat, his touch as respectful as always despite the flutter his hands at her waist now consistently produced in her stomach. Ezra provided final directions for the most direct route to Wickenburg, warning them of a washed-out section of trail they should avoid. "Be careful out there," the old trader cautioned as they prepared to depart. "Those bandits are still around, and they've got reason to hold a grudge now." "We'll keep our eyes open," Kieran assured him, checking his revolver one last time before tucking it securely in its holster. With final farewells, they set off, the rising sun at their backs as they continued southwest toward Wickenburg. The day promised to be cooler than the previous ones, with scattered clouds offering occasional respite from the sun's intensity. Alina found herself increasingly aware of the dwindling miles to their destination. a bittersweet feeling settling over her. While she was eager to see her inheritance and begin this new chapter of her life, the prospect of parting ways with Kieran left her unexpectedly melancholy. "Penny for your thoughts," Kieran said after they'd traveled in silence for some time. Eleanor smiled ruefully. "I'm not sure they're worth even that much. Just contemplating what awaits in Wickenburg, I suppose." Kieran nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Nervous, a little," Eleanor admitted. "It's one thing to plan a new life from the safety of Boston, another entirely to face the reality of it." Having second thoughts, Eleanor considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Despite everything, the accident, the bandits, all the hardships of the journey, I'm still certain this is what I want. Does that sound foolish?" "Not foolish," Kieran replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Brave." Their conversation flowed easily as they traveled, discussing practical matters about the ranch and what Eleanor should expect upon arrival. Kieran offered advice about dealing with the bank in Wickenburg, where her uncle had kept his accounts, suggested reputable merchants for supplies she might need, and promised to introduce her to neighbors who could be counted on for help. "The territory has its share of hard men and swindlers," he warned. "But there are good people too, folks who understand that out here. We all depend on each other to survive." By mid-afternoon, they could see the distant outlines of Wickenburg on the horizon, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley along the Hassayampa River. Eleanor felt a surge of anticipation mingled with trepidation as they drew closer to their destination. "We should reach town within 2 hours," Kieran estimated, "but your uncle's ranch is a bit beyond, to the southwest. We might not make it before dark." "I'd prefer to continue directly to the ranch if you don't mind," Eleanor said. "I'm eager to see it, and I'd rather not spend another night in a strange place if I can sleep under my own roof tonight, however humble it might be." Kieran nodded, understanding her sentiment. "To the ranch, then." As they approached Wickenburg, the landscape grew more verdant, the harsh desert giving way to areas of grassland and scattered trees along the river's course. They skirted the edge of town, Kieran pointing out landmarks: the steepled church, the 2-story brick hotel that represented the height of local luxury, the mercantile where Eleanor would find most supplies she needed. The settlement was larger than Eleanor had expected, with perhaps 50 buildings arranged along dusty streets. Though modest compared to eastern cities, Wickenburg had an air of permanence and prosperity that suggested it would continue to grow as the territory developed. Beyond the town, they followed a well-traveled road that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees. Cattle grazed in the distance, and occasional homesteads could be seen nestled against hillsides or near stands of trees that suggested water sources. "That's Circle D land now," Kieran said after they'd traveled a few miles, indicating the vast expanse to their right. "Donovan's main house is about 3 miles that way over that ridge." "And my uncle's property?" Eleanor asked eagerly. "Not far now." "Just beyond that line of cottonwoods ahead, where the creek bends. You'll see the roof of the cabin once we crest that small rise." True to his word, as they reached the top of a gentle slope, a small ranch came into view in the valley below. Eleanor's breath caught at her first sight of her inheritance, a modest cabin with a stone chimney, a barn and corral nearby, and several outbuildings arranged around a central yard. A creek, the Hassayampa, Kieran had explained, wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood and willow trees that provided welcome shade. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "Sam chose well," Kieran agreed, a smile in his voice at her evident pleasure. "That's Juan and Maria's place there." He pointed to a small adobe structure set a little apart from the main cabin. "Looks like they're still here. There's smoke from the chimney." As they approached down the slope, a figure emerged from the barn, a stocky, middle-aged man with graying dark hair and a weathered complexion. He shaded his eyes against the late afternoon sun, watching their approach with evident curiosity. Juan Vasquez, Kieran identified him. "Good man. Worked for your uncle for nearly 15 years. When they reached the yard, Juan stepped forward to meet them, recognition dawning on his face as he saw Kieran. "Senor Quad," he greeted, then his gaze shifted questioningly to Alina. "Juan," Kieran replied with a nod of respect. "This is Miss Alina Adams, Sam Bennett's niece from Boston. She's come to claim her inheritance." Juan's weathered face broke into a warm smile as he removed his hat. "Miss Adams, we have been expecting you since the lawyer's letter came. Welcome to your home." A plump, pleasant-faced woman hurried from the adobe house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Juan, who is it?" "Maria, it is Senor Bennett's niece," Juan called to his wife. "She has arrived from the east." Maria's face lit up as she approached, her welcome as warm as her husband's. "Miss Adams." "Oh, we are so glad you have come. We feared perhaps you would sell the ranch without ever seeing it." "I wouldn't dream of it," Alina assured her, immediately liking the couple. "Though I must warn you, I know very little about ranching. I hope you'll both stay and help me learn." The relief on their faces was evident. Clearly, they had worried about their future once the property changed hands. "Of course, Señorita," Juan said immediately. "This has been our home for many years. We would be honored to continue working for you as we did for your uncle." While Juan helped Kieran unhitch the team and see to the horses, Maria insisted on showing Alina the cabin despite the lateness of the hour. "You must see your new home," she declared, gently guiding Alina toward the main structure. The cabin was simple but solid, just as Kieran had described, two main rooms with a large stone fireplace separating them. The front room served as kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, several chairs, and a small sofa positioned near the hearth. The back room was a bedroom, furnished with a brass bed, chest of drawers, and small writing desk near the window. Everything was spotlessly clean, with fresh curtains at the windows and a colorful woven rug on the plank floor. On the mantel, as Martha had mentioned, stood a daguerreotype in a silver frame, a formal portrait of Alina's family taken when she was perhaps 12 years old. "We kept everything just as Senor Bennett left it," Maria explained, watching anxiously for Alina's reaction. "Is it to your liking?" Alina turned to the older woman, emotion welling in her throat. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "More than I dared hope for." Maria beamed, clearly relieved. "I have prepared supper, a special meal to welcome you home, and of course, Senor Quad must stay and eat with us." By the time they rejoined the men outside, Kieran had unloaded Alina's trunks and personal belongings from the wagon and carried them into the cabin. Juan was showing him the condition of the livestock, the small herd of cattle grazing in a pasture beyond the barn, and the 6 horses in the corral, including a gentle mare that Juan suggested would be suitable for Alina once she was ready to ride. The sight of Kieran moving so naturally around what was now her property, discussing cattle and water rights with Juan as if he'd always belonged there, created a strange ache in Alina's chest. Tomorrow he would return to the Circle D, and this brief, intense chapter of their acquaintance would close. The thought was more painful than she had anticipated. Maria's welcome supper was a feast by frontier standards: chicken stewed with chilies and herbs, fresh tortillas, beans seasoned with ham, and a sweet custard for dessert. They ate at the table in Alina's new cabin, the conversation flowing easily despite the mix of languages. Juan and Maria spoke English well enough, though they occasionally lapsed into Spanish when searching for particular words, with Kieran sometimes translating. Juan was just saying that the north pasture will need new fencing before winter, Kieran explained at one point. The spring floods damaged a section along the creek. Alina nodded, trying to absorb all the information about her new property. Make a list of everything that needs attention, please, Juan. I want to understand the condition of the ranch fully. As the meal concluded, Maria tactfully suggested showing Alina where linens and other household necessities were stored, leaving Kieran and Juan to discuss more ranch business over coffee. You are fortunate to have Senor Quad's help, Maria commented as they examined the contents of a cedar chest filled with clean bedding. He is well respected in these parts, knows ranching better than most who have been here twice as long. Yes, I've been incredibly fortunate that he came along when he did, Alina agreed, remembering their chance meeting that now seemed providential rather than random. Maria gave her a knowing look. And he is not married, you know. Many local girls have tried to catch his eye, but he has always been. She searched for the word, reservado, private. Alina felt her cheeks warm at the implication. We're merely acquaintances, Maria. He helped me when I was injured, nothing more. The older woman smiled but said nothing further, though her expression suggested she had her own thoughts on the matter. When they returned to the main room, Kieran stood, his hat in his hands. It's getting late, he said. I should head back to the Circle D. Donovan will be wondering what's kept me. Alina felt a surge of disappointment despite knowing this moment had been inevitable. Of course, you've already done far more than could be expected. Juan and Maria exchanged glances before Juan cleared his throat. It is very dark already, Senor Quad. Perhaps you should wait until morning to return. The bunkhouse has a clean bed, or you could stay in the cabin. Kieran hesitated, his eyes meeting Alina's briefly. I wouldn't want to impose further. It's not an imposition, Alina said quickly, perhaps too quickly. After everything you've done, the least we can offer is a proper night's rest before you return. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then Kieran nodded. Thank you, the bunkhouse will be fine. Juan and Maria soon took their leave for their own home, promising to return at sunrise to help with morning chores. As the door closed behind them, Alina found herself alone with Kieran for the first time since their arrival at the ranch. An awkward silence fell between them, as if both suddenly realized the unusual nature of their brief, yet intense acquaintance. They were no longer travelers thrown together by circumstance, but a man and woman alone in her home, governed by social conventions that seemed simultaneously important and irrelevant after what they'd shared. Would you like more coffee? Alina finally asked, gesturing to the pot on the stove. Thank you, Kieran replied, setting his hat aside and returning to the table. As Alina poured the coffee, she struggled to find words adequate to express her gratitude for all he had done. Kieran, she began, setting his cup before him and taking the seat opposite, I don't know how to properly thank you for everything, if you hadn't come along when you did. But I did, he said simply, his blue eyes holding hers across the table. And here you are, safe at your new home. Because of you. Kieran shook his head slightly. You would have found a way. I've rarely met anyone with your determination, Alina. You were driving a wagon with a broken arm when I found you. Most men would have given up at that point. Perhaps, Alina conceded, but the fact remains that your help has been invaluable. She paused, gathering her courage. And I find myself reluctant to see our acquaintance end. Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or hope. As neighbors, we're bound to cross paths, he said carefully. Is that all we are, neighbors? The directness of her question seemed to startle him. For a long moment, Kieran simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Alina," he said, his voice low and serious, "in the span of 3 days, you've come to mean more to me than anyone has in a very long time. But you're just beginning a new life here, and I don't want to complicate things for you before you've even had a chance to find your footing." The warmth of his calloused hand around hers sent a thrill through Alina that she couldn't have anticipated. "What if I want complications?" she asked softly. A smile tugged at the corner of Kieran's mouth. "Then I'd say you're even braver than I thought." Their gazes held across the table, something unspoken yet profound passing between them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Kieran raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture held such tenderness that Alina felt her breath catch. Here was a man who had faced bandits without flinching, who had survived war and the harsh realities of frontier life, yet could still convey such gentleness in a single touch. "It's getting late," Kieran said finally, reluctantly releasing her hand. "You should rest. It's been a long journey." Alina nodded, knowing he was right but unwilling to end this moment between them. "Will I see you before you leave in the morning? Count on it," Kieran promised, rising from the table. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye properly." As he collected his hat and prepared to depart for the bunkhouse, Alina followed him to the door. There, he turned to face her once more, his expression serious yet tender. "Good night, Alina," he said softly, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Good night, Kieran," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might say more or perhaps lean down to kiss her properly. Instead, with visible restraint, he stepped back, tipped his hat, and disappeared into the darkness. Alina closed the door behind him, leaning against it as her heart raced with emotions she hadn't experienced in years, not since the early days of her courtship with her late husband. Yet this was different somehow, more intense, as if the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting had compressed weeks of normal acquaintance into mere days. As she prepared for bed in what was now her room, Alina found herself wondering what the morning would bring. Kieran would return to the Circle D, she knew, but now she had reason to hope that wouldn't be the end of their connection. With that comforting thought, Alina drifted to sleep in her new home, the sound of the creek flowing past her window a gentle lullaby in the Arizona night. Morning arrived with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the cabin's east-facing windows, and the distant sounds of activity from the barn Juan, already at work with the livestock. Alina dressed quickly, eager to begin her first full day at the ranch, and, she admitted to herself, equally eager to see Kieran once more before he departed. She found Maria in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the ease of long familiarity in the space. "Good morning, Señorita," the older woman greeted warmly. "Did you sleep well in your new home?" "Wonderfully," Alina replied truthfully. "It already feels more like home than I expected." Maria beamed with pleasure at this. "Your uncle would be so happy to know you feel this way. He always hoped family would continue his work here." As they prepared the morning meal together, Alina inquired about the routine of the ranch, determined to learn as much as possible as quickly as possible. Maria patiently explained their daily schedule, from the early morning feeding and watering of livestock to the seasonal tasks that kept the small ranch functioning efficiently. "Juan has taught our sons the ranching life, but they have their own families now in Tucson," Maria explained. "They visit when they can, especially at roundup time when more hands are needed." Alina was relieved to learn that additional help was available for the most labor-intensive tasks, given her current disability and inexperience. And what about other neighbors? Are they willing to assist when needed? Oh yes, Maria assured her. That is the way here. Everyone helps everyone or none of us would survive. The Circle D has always been good to us. Senor Donovan sends men for roundup and branding, and in return, Juan helps repair their fences or search for strays when needed. The mention of the Circle D inevitably brought Kieran to mind. And Mr. Quad, has he been with the Circle D long? 5 years, perhaps? Maria considered. He came first as a regular hand, but Senor Donovan recognized his worth quickly, made him foreman within a year, much to the surprise of those who had been there longer. I can understand why, Alina commented, remembering Kieran's quiet competence and natural leadership during their journey. Maria gave her a knowing look. He is a good man, Miss Alina. The best kind, one who does what is right without expectation of reward or recognition. Before Alina could respond, the door opened, and the subject of their conversation entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Kieran had clearly been up for hours. His clothes were dusty from work, and he smelled of horses and the morning air. "Good morning," he greeted, his eyes finding Alina's immediately. "Juan mentioned the pump at the corral needs repair. I took a look. Shouldn't be difficult to fix before I head back." "You don't need to do that," Alina protested, though she was secretly pleased by any reason for him to delay his departure. "It's no trouble," Kieran assured her, accepting the cup of coffee Maria offered. "Shouldn't take more than an hour." Breakfast was a lively affair, with Juan joining them to discuss the day's tasks and provide a more detailed assessment of the ranch's condition. To Alina's relief, while there were certainly matters requiring attention, nothing seemed urgently critical. "The herd is small but healthy," Juan reported. 58 head, including 12 calves born this spring. The north pasture fence needs repair before winter, as I mentioned, and the roof of the storage shed could use some work before the rainy season. Alina listened attentively, making mental notes and occasionally asking questions. She was determined to understand every aspect of her new property, however daunting the learning curve might be. Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of Kieran's presence across the table, his occasional glances in her direction suggesting he was equally conscious of her. There was a new awareness between them after their conversation the previous evening, an unspoken acknowledgement of possibilities neither had fully articulated. After breakfast, while Kieran and Juan went to repair the pump, Alina insisted on helping Maria with the dishes despite her splinted arm. As they worked, Alina gathered the courage to ask about something that had been on her mind. "Maria, how often do people from here travel to the Circle D?" Maria smiled, understanding the real question behind Alina's inquiry. "Juan goes once a month or so to help with various tasks or to borrow equipment we need, and sometimes Senor Quad or other Circle D hands pass by on their way to town." She paused, her expression gentle. "The distance is not so great as to prevent regular visits if one is motivated to make them." Alina nodded, grateful for the older woman's tact in not making her feelings more obvious than they already were. By mid-morning, Kieran had repaired the pump and made some additional adjustments to the corral gate that had been sticking. The time for his departure could no longer be delayed if he was to reach the Circle D by afternoon. Juan offered to accompany him for part of the way, as he needed to check cattle in a pasture that bordered Circle D land, leaving Alina and Kieran momentarily alone in the yard as he saddled his horse. "Will you be all right?" Kieran asked, his eyes searching hers with genuine concern. "Running a ranch isn't easy under the best circumstances, and with that arm." "I'll manage," Alina assured him, though the prospect of his departure left her feeling more bereft than she wanted to admit. "Juan and Maria are a godsend, and I'm a quick learner." Kieran nodded, seemingly satisfied with her determination. "I have no doubt of that." He hesitated, then added, "I'll come by in a few days to check on you on the arm, make sure it's healing properly." Hope fluttered in Alina's chest at this promise of seeing him again so soon. "I'd appreciate that." As Juan returned with his own horse saddled and ready, Kieran mounted up, looking down at Alina from his chestnut stallion. "Take care of yourself, Alina Adams," he said softly, his blue eyes holding hers. "Don't try to do too much at once." "I'll try to remember that," she replied, managing a smile despite the lump forming in her throat. With a final tip of his hat, Kieran turned his horse and rode out of the yard, Juan following behind. Alina watched until they disappeared over the rise, feeling as if something essential was leaving with him. Maria appeared beside her, a sympathetic hand on her arm. "He will be back, señorita, sooner than you might think." "I hope so," Alina murmured, before turning resolutely toward the cabin. She had a new life to build, and regardless of what might develop between her and Kieran Quad, that work needed to begin immediately. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, as Alina immersed herself in learning the operations of the ranch. Despite her injury, she insisted on participating in as many tasks as possible, observing when she couldn't actively help, asking endless questions of Juan and Maria, who patiently guided her through the basics of ranch management. Each morning, she rose before dawn to accompany Juan on his rounds, watching as he checked the livestock, inspected fences, and assessed water levels in the creek that was the lifeblood of the property. In the afternoons, Maria taught her the domestic skills necessary for frontier survival: how to preserve food for the winter months, the medicinal uses of local plants, the art of baking bread in a temperamental wood stove. The physical work was exhausting but satisfying in a way Alina had never experienced in her previous life. Each day brought new challenges and small victories, from successfully gathering eggs without breaking them one-handed to learning to identify each cow in their small herd by sight. Through it all, thoughts of Kieran were never far from her mind. Though she threw herself into ranch life with determination, Alina found herself watching the horizon, hoping to see a rider approaching from the direction of the Circle D. True to his word, Kieran appeared 3 days after his departure, riding into the yard late in the afternoon as Alina was helping Maria hang laundry on the line. "Miss Adams," he greeted formally, tipping his hat as he dismounted, though his eyes conveyed a warmth that belied the propriety of his address. "Thought I'd check on that arm, as promised." Alina couldn't suppress her smile at seeing him again. "Mr. Quad, what a pleasant surprise." Maria, displaying remarkable tact, suddenly remembered urgent business in the cabin, leaving them alone in the yard. "How are you settling in?" Kieran asked, leading his horse to the water trough. "Better than I expected," Alina replied honestly. "Juan and Maria have been wonderful teachers, and I'm learning something new every hour, it seems. And the arm, healing well, I think. The pain is much less now." Kieran nodded approvingly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the splint. At Alina's nod, he gently examined her arm, his touch professional but still sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with pain. "Looks good," he pronounced, rewrapping the bandages. "Another month in the splint, I'd say, but it's mending clean." "Thanks to your skilled attention," Alina said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them standing in the dusty yard. Then Juan appeared from the direction of the barn, breaking the spell. "Señor Quad, good to see you," he called. "Perhaps you will stay for supper." Maria has made her special stew. Kieran hesitated only briefly before accepting the invitation. The evening that followed was filled with easy conversation and laughter as Kieran shared stories of his week at the Circle D, including an amusing tale of a prize bull that had somehow managed to get itself stuck in a narrow arroyo, requiring 6 men and 2 ropes to extract it. As darkness fell, Alina found herself reluctant to see the evening end, knowing Kieran would need to return to his own ranch. To her surprise and pleasure, he seemed equally unwilling to depart. "It's getting late," Juan observed tactfully as they finished coffee after the meal. "Perhaps Senor Quad should stay in the bunkhouse again rather than riding back in the dark." Alina caught the meaningful glance that passed between Juan and Maria, suspecting they were deliberately creating opportunities for her and Kieran to spend time together. She felt a rush of gratitude for their subtle matchmaking efforts. "That's very kind," Kieran replied, "but I don't want to take advantage of your hospitality." "Nonsense," Alina said firmly. "You're always welcome here, Kieran." The use of his given name in front of Juan and Maria was deliberate, a small acknowledgement of the shifting nature of their relationship. After Juan and Maria departed for their own home, Alina and Kieran once again found themselves alone in the cabin. This time, the awkwardness of their previous evening together was replaced by a comfortable familiarity, as if they'd known each other far longer than the week of their acquaintance. "Would you like to sit outside for a while?" Alina suggested. "The night is beautiful, and I've come to love watching the stars here. They seem so much brighter than they were in Boston." Kieran agreed readily, and they settled on a bench outside the cabin door, the vast Arizona sky spread above them like a blanket of diamonds on black velvet. The night was cool but not cold, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I've been thinking about you," Kieran admitted after a companionable silence, his voice low in the darkness, "wondering how you were managing." "I've been thinking about you too," Alina replied with equal honesty, emboldened by the night. Kieran turned toward her, his features partially illuminated by the light spilling from the cabin window. "Alina, I meant what I said the other night. These feelings. They've come on faster and stronger than I would have thought possible." Alina nodded, understanding perfectly. "For me as well. It seems impossible that we met only a week ago. I feel as if I've known you much longer." "Perhaps it's the circumstances," Kieran suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation. "Facing danger together, depending on one another." "Perhaps," Alina conceded. "Or perhaps it's simply that sometimes two people recognize something in each other that doesn't require the usual time to develop." Kieran's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with her own. "I'd like to court you properly, Alina Adams, if you're amenable." Joy bloomed in Alina's chest at his formal declaration of intent. "I'm very amenable, Kieran Quad." In the silver moonlight, Kieran's smile was breathtaking. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. Alina responded without hesitation, her good hand rising to rest against his cheek as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I should go," he murmured, "before I forget myself entirely." Alina nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right. They were alone, unchaperoned, and despite the frontier's more relaxed social codes, certain proprieties still mattered, especially at the beginning of a courtship. "When will I see you again?" she asked as they rose from the bench. "Soon," Kieran promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "Very soon." True to his word, Kieran began riding over to the Bennett Ranch, now the Adams Ranch, regularly, at first under the pretense of checking on Alina's arm or helping Juan with repairs around the property. As the weeks passed, these visits increased in frequency and duration, with Kieran often staying for supper and sometimes overnight in the bunkhouse. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised them both. On Sundays, Kieran would arrive in his best clothes to escort Alina to the small church in Wickenburg, introducing her to neighbors and helping her establish herself within the community. Afterward, they would often picnic along the creek or ride slowly around the perimeter of her property, Kieran teaching Alina about the land as her arm healed enough to permit horseback riding. During these outings, they shared their histories more fully. Alina spoke of her childhood in Boston, her brief but happy marriage, and the devastating loss that had set her on the path to Arizona. Kieran, initially reticent about his past, gradually revealed more of his own story: his youth in Virginia, his service in the Union Army despite his Southern roots, the restless years after the war when he drifted west seeking a place to belong. "I never intended to stay in Arizona territory this long," he admitted one afternoon as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the creek flow past. "Thought I'd move on after a season or two, keep heading west maybe all the way to California, but something about this land got under my skin. Harsh as it is, it felt like a place where a man could start fresh, leave the past behind." "And have you?" Alina asked gently. "Left the past behind?" Kieran's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed across the grassland stretching toward distant mountains. "Most of it. The war left scars that don't entirely fade, and losing my ranch in '77 was a hard blow." He glanced at her, a smile softening his features. "But lately, I've been thinking more about the future than the past." The implication in his words sent a warm thrill through Alina. Though he had not yet spoken of marriage directly, the direction of their relationship seemed increasingly clear to both of them. By late October, 6 weeks after their first meeting, Alina's arm had healed enough for Kieran to remove the splint, though he cautioned her to be gentle with it for another month. The ranch was running smoothly under her direction, with Juan and Maria's guidance proving invaluable as she learned the complex rhythms of the agricultural year. On a crisp autumn evening with the first chill of winter in the air, Kieran arrived at the ranch earlier than usual, dressed in his best clothes and clearly nervous about something. He found Alina in the garden behind the cabin, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the impending frost. "You're early," she observed with pleasure, rising to greet him with soil-stained hands. "And dressed for church, though it's only Thursday." Kieran removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I spoke with Donovan today," he said without preamble, "about my position at the Circle D." Alina's heart stuttered. "Are you leaving?" The thought of Kieran departing the area filled her with sudden dread. "No," he reassured her quickly. "Just the opposite, in fact. I've asked him to consider promoting one of the other hands to foreman." Confusion furrowed Alina's brow. "But why? You love that position." Kieran took a deep breath, visibly gathering his courage. "Because if certain hopes of mine are realized, I'd need more flexible arrangements. I thought perhaps we might consider merging operations." "Merging?" Alina began, then understanding dawned. "Kieran, are you proposing?" A flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Not very eloquently, it seems." He stepped closer, taking her hands despite the garden dirt that clung to them. "Alina Adams, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I've fallen in love with you, your courage, your determination, your kind heart. If you feel the same, I'd be honored if you'd consent to be my wife." Joy surged through Alina, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said simply, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Yes, Kieran, I'll marry you." His smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had grown steadily during their courtship. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know it's not what you might have had in Boston," he said apologetically, opening the pouch to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect sapphire. "But when I saw it in the jeweler's case in Prescott last week, it reminded me of your eyes." "It's beautiful," Alina whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. "Perfect." That evening, when Juan and Maria learned of their engagement, the celebration was joyous. Maria produced a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and toasts were made to the future of the combined ranches. "My Tio would be very happy," Maria declared, wiping tears from her eyes. "He always hoped the ranch would remain in good hands." "We'll do our best to honor his legacy," Kieran promised, his arm around Alina's waist. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as they prepared both for their wedding and for the practical aspects of merging their lives. Kieran began spending more time at the Adams Ranch, helping to implement improvements he and Alina had discussed and gradually moving his belongings from the Circle D bunkhouse to what would soon be their shared home. James Donovan, Kieran's employer, proved supportive of their plans, offering to purchase Kieran's small stake in the Circle D herd at a generous price to provide additional capital for the newlyweds' operations. He also promised continued cooperation between the ranches, recognizing the practical benefits of neighbors working together in the challenging frontier environment. Their wedding took place in early December, a simple ceremony in the Wickenburg church, followed by a celebration at the ranch that drew neighbors from miles around. Alina wore a dress of deep blue silk ordered from a shop in Prescott, with Maria's lace mantilla serving as both veil and something borrowed. As the new Mrs. Quad danced with her husband under stars bright as diamonds in the clear winter sky, Alina reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as a desperate solo trek across the Arizona territory with a broken arm had transformed into a new life filled with purpose, community, and most unexpectedly, love. "Happy," Kieran murmured, holding her close as they swayed to the music provided by local musicians. "More than I ever thought possible," Alina replied truthfully, gazing up at the man who had splinted her arm, driven her wagon, and ultimately captured her heart. "Good," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "because this is just the beginning." As the years passed, the Quad Ranch prospered under their joint management. Alina's Eastern education and head for figures complemented Kieran's practical experience and innovative approaches to ranching challenges. They gradually expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and increasing their herd through careful breeding and management. A year after their wedding, Alina gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel, after her uncle. 2 years later, their daughter Catherine joined the family, followed eventually by twins Michael and Rebecca. The children grew up immersed in ranch life, learning both the practical skills their father taught and developing an appreciation for literature, history, and music under their mother's guidance. Juan and Maria remained essential parts of both the ranch operation and the family, becoming honorary grandparents to the Quad children and trusted advisors in all matters. Their sons and families would visit during Roundup and other busy seasons, creating a network of support that ensured the ranch's continued success. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Alina with a special gift, the deed to the piece of land where they had made their first camp together, the night he had splinted her broken arm. He had quietly purchased it from the government land office, ensuring it would always remain part of their family's legacy. "This is where our story truly began," he explained as they stood together on the rise overlooking the spot where his campfire had once burned. "I wanted it to be ours forever." Elinor leaned against her husband's strong shoulder, his arm secure around her waist, and gazed across the landscape that had become home. "Who would have thought a broken arm could lead to such happiness?" she mused. Kieran chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I knew you were something special the moment I saw you driving that wagon one-handed, determination written all over your face despite the pain. I just didn't realize how completely you would change my life." "For the better, I hope," Elinor teased, though she knew the answer. "In every way imaginable," Kieran assured her, turning her in his arms to kiss her properly. The Arizona sunset painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson behind them, a fitting backdrop to a love that had been forged in the crucible of the Wild West, and had only grown stronger with each passing year. And as they rode home together in the gathering dusk, Elinor reflected that sometimes life's most painful moments, like a broken arm on a lonely desert trail, could lead to its greatest joys, if one had the courage to continue the journey.